Hey, Charles. Good to be sitting in a couch or a chair across from you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that it was unexpected. We did plan this in advance. It's not just like we're just happened to be sitting here and there happened to be cameras. But we actually had a plan that we were going to...
Yeah, would you be willing to situate where we are right now?
We are at the Imagine Convergence on Orcas Island. Lots of people, like 300-400 people are here. And the stated topic is emergence, right?
Imagine Convergence.
No, but the theme is emergence. Isn't that what you were saying? Someone was saying that.
I love it if it
I
is.
think that's in it.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm not sure if people could really say exactly why they're here. Usually in fact, we did like a little process at the beginning where people were trying to describe why they're here. And I find that my first impulse when someone asks me, well, what brought you here, or why are you here, is to lie. To produce the answer that fits in with my self-image, with my worldview, like that kind of explains in a really impressive way why I'm here. Yeah. And I wonder how many people really know why they're here. Why are you here?
The funny when you said that, what came to me was like, how can I come up with an impressive
Yeah,
version of what to say?
Yeah.
And maybe though this to me goes to the theme of emergence, because for me, I don't know why I'm here. Like, it's almost like the call comes and there's this, I should come. But then afterwards you have to come up with the reasons. Like, oh, because
right.
XYZ. And I wonder about what that organizing intelligence is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could say that if I were being honest, I would say after I leave, I'll know why I came. Mm-hmm. And the impulse to produce an answer prematurely, it kind of pretends to this deliberation and control over my life that I do not actually exercise. Mm-hmm. Like it's kind of like the pretense is that before any decision that I make, I go through like this ethical calculation, or this moral calculation or this spiritual calculation, and I decide, okay, I'm doing this because of this, and this reason, that I'm very principled and all that. And it's just not actually how I make decisions. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'm aware of a reason why I made a decision, and other times I later discover unconscious reasons why I actually did something. And so it is kind of magical that, assuming that, I'm not the lone basket case, the lone spiritual basket case here, but that most of us are kind of like me, assuming that, it is kind of a miracle that these things even happen and that everybody converges at the call of something. Yeah, so I'm curious to see what, in a week or a year or 10 years to really be able to see the landscape of what brought me here.
Yeah. We had a brief conversation yesterday about looking back at a film that we'd first collaborated on, Sacred Economics, based on your book, and the whole story that was kind of like that too, that brought it together, why suddenly, I flew out and stayed with your family and we shot the interview and put the film out, and kind of again under that sort of only making sense in retrospect why that would be something to do. And the other thing that came through was looking, it's 8 years ago now or something, and how younger you looked, being the one on camera, and how this understanding, maybe like the story, is that you only understand, you're only young in retrospect.
Right.
And then the story only makes sense in retrospect. And so I feel for this gathering, I'm curious, is there like a hint of what the purpose of this may be, or why we're coming together in this way, particularly now? What would it mean to think about 10 years from now, looking back and be like, oh, if there was a sense of understanding?
Yeah, some things that we do make sense a week later. Like, okay, that's why I did that. And now I'm not talking about the internal motivation, but I'm talking about what it serves. Because granting that our life course is in a disturbing, to a disturbing degree, preordained or influenced by forces far beyond our understanding. You know, I told you the story the other day about this couple, you know, and they got together because the guy just had like this dream, and he called her just when she had made this plea to, if there's a partner out there, please tell me. And like, whoa, these people are not in charge here, you know, at least not on the level that we think we're in charge. So granting that there is some organizing intelligence that's putting us together for an unfathomable purpose, granting that, okay, sometimes the purpose, the reason that we're brought together is clear a week later or a year later, but the subtlety and grand mystery of this intelligence, assuming it exists, and I've been accused of being too woo-woo here, assuming that it exists, some of its purposes do not manifest for 500 years or 1,000 years. And we won't know. I think that what is stirring on Earth right now is on that order and on that time scale. The pieces of an inconceivably vast puzzle are coming together, and some of what we do we might understand at the end of our lives and see the purpose that it served, and other things will not be apparent for thousands of years. Like, that's the scale that this is happening on. So, you know, given that, like, I mean, maybe I could venture to articulate what that purpose is, but I would rather just be present to the feeling that there is something like that happening.
I read a book a few years ago, but by Michael White, he's come accredited as the co-founder of the Occupy movement. And in the book, he talks about the end of protest. But one of the ideas he talks about is this idea of slow activism, where it's similar to that vein of how to create action where you're actually aware of that this may not flower for hundreds of years,
right,
let's say, and how that even conceiving of that is somewhat turns on its head the idea of kind of applying a force, like a causal force, to create the change with an urgency that somewhat doesn't announce or doesn't have an awareness of contributing to the same, more of the same. So I guess I'm curious with, again, gatherings like this, when in some ways they have a mandate, so like emergence or new ideas and things like that. And I know we've been to a number now, from Burning Man to News Story Summit and these things. And I'm curious how to, what do you see in this one already, perhaps, that is maybe whispering that spirit of what you're talking about? Or what are the conditions that allow for that spirit to come through, even though we may not understand, quote, for many times? How do we know it's in the room?
Looking out at the water here. I sense it in the room in any of these things, to the degree that people are there in a place of humility. Because for this coordinating, cohering purpose to operate, people have to be willing to be employed by it and to be in service to it. And that means that other agendas have to be put aside to some extent. So it could be the agenda of asserting dominance in a certain subculture, or it could be the agenda of making your voice heard, or evangelizing your cause. And these are not necessarily bad things. There are people whose voices need to be heard. There are causes that need to be evangelized. But if something else is to happen beyond our conception and beyond what we know can happen or should happen, then there has to be some stepping into the I don't know. And some willingness to to engage novelty and some willingness to even experience a little bit of humiliation, which is, if you think humility is good, then humiliation is good too. It's a clearing away of a structure that is not only a knowledge structure, but it's part of an identity structure. So if there's some willingness to do that, that creates an invitation for this, to me, like this palpable power to begin bringing us together. And when that operates, then the synchronicities start happening. I know, like you've done work around Burning Man, this is a really lively question. What generates synchronicity? Yeah. And part of it, I think, is stepping outside what the kind of familiar routines and mental habits and relational habits that hold reality in place as it is. So I can't say after the first day here how much of that I'm feeling. I would say it hasn't happened yet, but I feel the potential for it to happen. Yeah.
I'm steeped in a practice called counsel, which I think you know as well. But many may understand it just as the circle and the talking piece and the deep listening. But they have, at least in the practice that I was trained, that there's a real naming and understanding of the presence of the third, what they say. But the third is the relational space between, and not just to individuals, but it could be especially the non-human realm, but also for a gathering, that gathering itself has a third that emerges or could emerge, and how, as the attendees can in a way like surrender their particular pieces, say that they came here to do or not, and start to tune into the third. It's like then the organizational intelligence starts to come in. And I feel like there's something about the erotic in that, though. And for me, though, but erotic not in the sexual way, but erotic in that there's a certain energy or liveliness that does come in. And I wonder about how to orient or program people into that deep listening or into that ability to track together. Because I know, for example, like New Story Summit, when it came to that, there's a big kind of chaotic moment, and in a way it was very lively. And because it was off script, in a way, it almost introduced a way of being, or like a way of being together with other humans that is so foreign to a culture that hasn't lived in a kind of, I would just call it more of a village setting, where the village forum often seemed to be the place where everybody could show up, and the village would figure out what's true together because they had that capacity and that skillfulness. And I feel like in those eruptive moments of chaos, it's like there's so much of us wants to quickly reconstitute, because it's scary to be like, whoa, what if we go off script? So what's the fear even of, say, going off script, not just from the organizational perspective, but even the participant perspective? What do they get confronted by when it's the willingness to actually put down the structure?
I think some of these structures are protective. There's so much trauma and pain and rage out there that if you completely just open the lid, then, and you only have 2 days or 3 days or a week, then a lot of damage could be done without any resolution. There's not a community over decades or generations that can hold that energy. So, that chaos you were talking about, that was a bit of an experiment and something that I didn't really even do on purpose. I was the pawn of larger forces. But I'm not, I'm definitely not going around and trying to sow chaos in every gathering that I attend. Trusting that chaos is breaking out regardless. As some of these cultural traumas bubble to the surface, they're breaking apart structures that have been in place for a long time. And it gets really messy, and sometimes causes more damage than it heals. But I think that it's maybe a necessary stage. But yeah, like, it's not an indictment of structure per se. It's more of a sign of the times.
I'm curious what you notice or like what excites you about the edge of gathering then now, like how to create the conditions or serve the conditions where it's not too much, letting go of the reins, and it's like, whoa, careful what you invite, but also like in the sense of you being even willing to heed the call versus, maybe other invitations to things that are just like, why is this particular one exciting, but also like what would be the edge to be calling in, for gatherings that people hold in the future?
I mean, are you talking like about me personally, or just as general principle of?
Both, I think. Because as you also serve, the most effective use of why you would show up somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have like a certain role in these gatherings. I rarely come just as a participant. I come as a speaker, and that's what I like to do and enjoy doing, and I'm effective at that. So in that capacity, I come where the invitation is the strongest and the most sincere, and that where I feel that there's receptivity, because I don't push things on people. It's tiring to do that. I am attracted to where there's eliciting, to where there's a receptivity to the specific things that I offer. And in some places those are not what's needed. Like, I just like everybody else, like I have certain medicine or certain gifts, and it's appropriate for certain places and not others. So I'm trying to tune into, is this a place where I'm going to be really put to good use, to justify to me the time spent away from family and the burden on my body to ride in airplanes and all that kind of stuff, not to mention the burden on other beings, the environment. So for me, it's like, is there this invitation? Is this where I'm meant to be? To tune into that. As a general principle, I'm looking either for a clear aim and purpose, not necessarily these are the measurable outcomes we're going to hope to achieve, but more of like, this is what we're serving, and it's not just an ideology, but it's it's an authentic service to something, That's one thing. Or the other thing is the kind of humility that I was talking about before, the willingness to go somewhere different. And I think that when people are called and that willingness in themselves is invoked, to come with different expectations, to come prepared not to maintain your usual social persona, to come expecting something that's going to challenge you. And when that's effectively communicated, and it's not just lip service, when people are coming in an altered state, let's put it that way, I find those events powerful. And so how do you create an altered state? Maybe you have something to say about this. Like what are the disruptive contra-programming that make people open to not being themselves as they're used to? Like, that's interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of one of the things I feel like I've tracked with these kinds of gatherings, and one of the key points of like modeling, let's say, I find is by leadership team or the production team to be able to come and speak, but there's a delicate line between being transparent about the process or behind the scenes, and like there's a way of basically saying, okay, look, we did do all this to create this, and this is us, and we're just people, or we're here to also listen. And there's that delicate line of kind of relinquishing, which to me is about the difference between a consumer model. So people come as consumers because often in this culture they're so trained into, they're in charge, they're the authority figures, right? And so we either have two choices, which is either, or as participants, to either conform, right, or rebel, right, to an authority. And it's like, so if I don't like something, or that talk was terrible, whatever, it's like I can just kind of rebel and condemn, or judge whatever it is, the production. But fundamentally, I don't take the leap into a participant model. And so for me, like, that's where the shift happens, when there's a and then again, not a lip service to participation. Sometimes that happens too, right? Like we're all doing this together, and da-da-da. But then it's like, okay, well, what about? And they're like, no, back to the program. That can happen a lot. But there's some kind of something that changes when people actually feel that it is this co-created something, and there is like a relinquishing of authority enough to, in a way, like invoke a different kind of mutual, something.
Right. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, okay, you're all here now, so we're turning it over to you. But there's some meaningful release of control that is true participation. Yeah. And I guess the skill comes in discerning what that might be in a given gathering. Like, what particular aspect of control are we willing to release, or how are we inviting meaningful participation, not the kind that we learned in high school where you get to vote on the homecoming queen. But anything real was firmly in the hands of the central authorities. Yeah, so what is that next step of unfolding into participation?
Where do you want to go from here? We got basically the last pivot to something.
I don't know. What do you get out of these, coming to these things? I mean, you traveled 12 hours to make the 12-mile journey across the national border to get here. So what makes it worth it for you if you come away and like, oh, I'm really glad I did that? What makes it worth it?
Thank you. Good question. I mean, I mentioned how I first met one of the organizers, Ben, at News Story Summit. And since then, I feel like I've tracked and wanted to participate with this particular group, which I understand is, the team shifts a little bit, but similar, many of the same people are working on the Imagine conference, Revival, this one. And so I feel, part of the discernment of the time for me is recognizing that we only have so much, effort and car, jet fuel and whatever, all the rest. And it's like time away from family now too. And so where do I want to dig in and actually build relationship and be a deeper ally to people that I see doing something, right? And in a way, if I'm able to take the systemic approach or systems approach to see, okay, so it's exciting that they're actually now pulling these different ingredients and coming together and kind of like, okay, let's see what this does, and the people are there and they do the thing, but also encouraging a feedback loop into the system from what they did learn. So what happened when we created this, big empty space, or we put the harvest at the end, or we, we gathered for longer, this time. So I'm constantly in that space of like learning, because I do feel the necessity to relinquish this idea that, again, they did the thing, and whether or not it lives or dies is based on, them, and versus from the systems approach, which is, oh, great, they're the node in the system that's creating these gatherings now, at least in this bioregion. And so for me, up where I am and also down here, having been so close to it, that to me is useful to begin to build like deeper relationships, right, with place. And that ultimately for me, that's why I feel called. And yes, there's, the films that I make and, the ideas to spread, certainly that's a key part.
So you're saying, are you saying that, when you go home and you assess, wow, was that a waste of time, or I'm really glad I came? That has something to do with whether or not it weaves you more deeply into a developing tribe, and gives you a stronger feeling of belonging to it. Yeah, I have the same thing sometimes where, there's a lot of this kind of stuff going on Earth, and if someone is inviting me to a totally new one, we're going to create this whole new tribe and this whole new movement, and like gosh, I'm spreading myself kind of thin. You know, I'd rather deepen my ties to the one that already exists. Yeah. That said, none of them are new. There's actually sometimes entirely new circles that invite me to be part of them that I didn't even know existed. Mm-hmm. So this movement is a lot bigger than the horizon that I can see to. But usually there's a lot of interlinkage among these. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I run into the same people, some subset of the same people at each of these different gatherings. And I do have a feeling that there's a tribe cohering or a movement cohering. Mm-hmm. And I think that is, and this is similar to what you're saying, that is actually one of the most important functions of these gatherings, mm-hmm. to create a sense of we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. Whatever this thing is, and we don't know what it is, and it might take 500 years to become visible, mm-hmm. whatever it is, mm-hmm. we're in it together. We're serving the same thing. I'm not crazy for doing that. Mm-hmm. I have comrades. And that is a sustaining force for me, mm-hmm. to know that I'm not in it alone, you know, that I have strong allies who value my gifts and I can value their gifts in turn. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm not lonely, and because when I'm lonely and when I don't feel that, then I'm beset with doubt, mm-hmm. about whether this is doing any good, because it isn't going to do any good if it's just me. You know what I mean? And sure, like I can read books and stuff, but there's something else that happens in a physical gathering, mm-hmm. that nourishes me. Mm-hmm. So that's, yeah, when I come away from one of these with at least some feeling of having been nourished as well as having been used well, mm-hmm. then I feel glad that I came. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It sounds erotic.
Yeah.
To be deeply embedded in.
Yeah, I mean it is. It's about becoming part of a larger whole. Like, I mean, maybe that's what Eros is, to release a boundary, mm. and come into intimate union with something, or the desire for that. That's what Eros is. Mm. Yeah.
I feel, do you have time for just, yeah. This to me is such a fascinating thread, because I know, we've both been at Tamara, community in Portugal, who has spent many, many years in research of, what is love and Eros and the political dimension and all the rest. And, this question around this idea that there's an organizing intelligence that is somehow, guiding, let's say, or calling forth those of us who can begin to hear. But I would call that force erotic, in that, like, in a way, that's the antenna, or that's the compass, is whether or not something's erotic. And again, I don't mean sexual necessarily, but that there's some kind of, the life energy that wants to, seek union, seek beauty, seek,
mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to, me using Tamara's lens or not, but it's like, how is that, in a way, like a guide in how we orient towards what is meaningful or what is useful to do right now?
Well, I guess it comes down to what is the 500 or 5,000 or 5 million year purpose for why we're here. And I think when you take it to that level, it's to serve life. That life is here to serve life. The purpose of life is life. It's more life. This is basic biology on one level, but it's also a feature of the evolving complexity of the planet, where the planet is becoming, well, the Anthropocene aside, the planet is becoming more and more alive over time, over millions of years. And the nature of these thermodynamically complex nonlinear systems is toward more and more complexity. They become more and more alive. So the purpose of life is to serve life, to serve the livingness, to make the whole universe alive. And erotic, or eros, is the impulse of life to create more life, in whatever form that takes. So sexual eros would be one form of that. And I guess I'm just kind of reframing what you're saying, and to say that, whatever intermediate goals and visions that we have, the overarching goal and vision is life. So, yeah.
Kind of like to leave it at life.
Life.
Happiness. Happiness. Happiness.